Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this episode, we're going to be reviewing Ironhack, and I invited three guests, three graduates on, and we're going to dive into their experience and see what it was like. So from left to right on my screen, we'll kind of start with our intros. Henry, you want to give us a short, quick intro about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Henry. I'm originally from Miami and just moved to Austin. I originally had done a bachelor's in psychology and was a counselor for severely mentally ill individuals for 3 years, mostly schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, with occasional comorbid drug addiction. After 3 years, I became a supervisor for that department. And it was around that time that I realized that the path I was on wasn't really aligning with what I wanted to do in the future. So I applied for Ironhack, and it just worked out from there. And here I am.
Welcome, Henry. That's really cool. I actually have a bachelor's in psychology too.
Hey, cool.
Yeah. And I'll do a quick intro. I was a software engineer for 3 companies, and the first 2 focused on front end. The third was a full stack position, and I finally saved up enough money. I've always wanted to, started my own company with about 2 years of runway, and I want to help software engineers out. And that's pretty much, this podcast is a big part of that company. So again, please keep giving me your feedback. It's super helpful. It's kind of what shapes and guides my podcast episodes and what I decide to record. So thank you for that. How about you, Rodrigo?
Right. So I didn't finish a bachelor's degree in psychology just because financial difficulties at the time, but that was my background. I then changed and went into event organization and streaming and digital video management on the events and live. I did it for about just a couple of years. Unfortunately, it's inconsistent and your life stops when an event comes up. And so I noticed that I didn't really want that inconsistency and that dependency on whatever event was happening. And of course, this year, everything stopped as well. So I began studying and developing WordPress sites. I started getting into web design, and I did a front-end course last year. That's when I really got into web development. Finished in March. COVID happened, the market completely froze, and that front-end course was focused on just static sites, HTML, CSS, a bit of JavaScript. And so I'm actually feel like a bit of an outlier because I finished in March, and the period between that and starting Ironhack at the beginning of July, I wanted to learn way more about web development than just that part. So the full stack part, way more about applications and backend as well. So I got into Ironhack already with some programming experience, and I ended at the end of August. And right now I'm still looking for my first position.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. How about you, Adrian? Quick 30-minute intro, or 30-second, please 30-second.
30 minutes, a little bit long.
I was long, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
It's also a lot about my life in 30 minutes. Anyway, my name's Adrian. I'm from Brazil, actually. That's why the accent is a little bit bad. But I'm 20 years old. I did Ironhack in August of 2019. Prior to it, I had 3 months of self-taught, just playing around experience with front end. I got as far as learning a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as everybody else. And I was starting to touch on Vue.js when I joined Ironhack. So like Rodrigo, I had a little bit of experience too. I joined Ironhack for plenty of reasons. One of them is my dad was currently living in Miami for a little while. And I spent a few months with him. I had the opportunity to study there after I won the scholarship that Ironhack was providing at the time. It was the Facebook scholarship.
Nice. And
that really helped me out. After that, by the end of the cohorts, the last 2 weeks, I was already employed, and I've been working with front end, specifically haven't touched back end since Ironhack. Now I have a year and a half of experience, professional experience. I worked at some Brazilian companies, and currently I work as a freelancer for a Simple Show, a company that is based in Miami, but it's around the globe. We have offices in Germany too, and a Brazilian company called EMOVL, which we work with data for just random buildings. And for rental, I don't know how to say it in English, I apologize, but it's basically companies that work with renting and selling of houses and advertising for that.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, Adrian.
No problem.
I say we jump into it. You ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
What do you think of the application process?
It was pretty straightforward, I thought. But no, it was just a simple. They give you a kind of a coding challenge. They give you a week. So I think the way I remember it, it's been a little bit longer for me. So maybe I was the worst person to be able to answer this. But I did it in the beginning of 2019. So I applied November of 2018. But from what I remember, I went in person. I kind of was able to see the actual the classroom, be able to walk around. I met in person with Alex. He was awesome, super nice. And they gave me a week from then to be able to do the coding challenge. And then from there, they kind of tell you whether you passed or not. And that's what I remember. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward, I thought.
In my experience, which I did earlier this year, I enrolled with ISA. So when I get a job is when I'll start paying. In my case, so there was first individual interview just to learn about me as a person and if I'm like a good fit. After that, there was like some technical exam, more or less. I can't remember if it was coding, but I think it was more like logical. So make different steps for this robot to move in this matrix and stuff like that. Relatively simple to get approved for the ISA process. After that, you actually, in my case, I get approved first, and then I start filling the pre-work, the challenges, see how the pre-work goes for you before classes start. And pre-work is supposedly several hours of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So not so much a coding challenge first, no filter on that part as far as I can remember. It was more like, are you a good fit and can you think logically? And it went from there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it was much like Henry. I applied 2 times as well. One time I did the complete process and the same as him, a coding assessment for a week. I talked with Alex through the phone and I got approved, but I didn't have the money to pay for it. So I let it go. And a couple of months later, I got an email from Ironhack saying they had this scholarship and I applied for it. I did the whole process again. I had an interview with Alex again. And I ended up winning a partial one, which allowed me to go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Henry, did you fail the first interview when you went in?
No, I passed it the first time.
Tell me the reason again why you applied twice.
Oh, no, I only applied once. I went once to be able to just see the actual campus.
That's right. Okay.
And then they just told me to come back in a week to do the technical challenge.
Okay, I gotcha. I misheard. Anyways, I was hoping one of you failed. That sounds cynical, but I actually think that's a good sign of a good coding boot camp. I like when they are a little bit stricter because I do believe in the reason why I think it's a good sign is just because when they bring in people of equal skill levels or they expect people to be at a certain bar, it's kind of just telling of like the difficulty of the curriculum. And I think I don't know. So I've gone back and forth with this between coding boot camps, and the last one I did, the entry level was so incredibly easy. There was no technical interview whatsoever. And it seemed like the coding boot camp, I don't know, it kind of lacked the ability to push people into professional positions. So it sounds like Ironhack is kind of medium difficulty. I'd never heard of a technical challenge where it was logical and you had to pretty much get a robot to kind of follow your commands. Yeah, they presented several problems. So granted, I believe that my memory is not the greatest. I just don't think there was some technical challenge involving JavaScript, for example, or actual code. I remember that there were several questions involving this type of logic. Okay, so imagine you wanted to move it these number of steps.
you write it out in this way, imagining each letter you type a certain command.
Also,
in my opinion, I don't think it was too hard. I think they put more value into seeing if people would actually do them and actually learn what is needed to do them, which it was a very simple challenge for JavaScript. It was Mars rover, what they call it. Probably is that until today, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't necessarily difficult. I remember there were some bonus challenges that really required more of you, but the challenge itself, for them to fail you, I think it's very unlikely.
I honestly might have so Mars rover is still in the pre-work. I think this is kind of the pre-work to be prepared for the actual class. I just don't think in my case I was required to do all that pre-work, which is like 30 hours supposedly for someone that's new first, which makes sense. You have to be approved, then do pre-work. I have talked with a student that's in Berlin who was having some financial difficulties, and so he delayed the Ironhack to next year, and then he had a second technical interview that involved something with JavaScript. So there might be some variance, but in my case, no coding first. That's only in the pre-work.
I would like to elaborate a little bit about my experience too. I can attest that I know that they definitely don't just let anyone in, because I know that I barely passed the technical personally. I had very little coding experience going into it. And I also suffer from pretty bad anxiety. So I remember being in a room where it was absolutely freezing, but I was so nervous that I was sweating through my shirt. And the first 10 minutes of the technical interview, I believe they gave me 30 minutes to solve a coding challenge. And the first 10 or 15 minutes, I was so nervous, I basically just blanked out and was staring at the screen and was just trying different things out until I got my nerve together and was able to solve the problem, right before the timer ended. So they had a grading scale of green is you pass with flying colors. I think yellow was you barely passed, you struggled, but you were able to do it. And then red was you just have no idea what was happening and you're not getting in. But I mean, again, it could be different depending on the campus and the time. I was before the Facebook scholarship, so I don't know how much things change from semester to semester. Okay,
that's interesting. I used to get a lot of anxiety too, Henry, tons. In interviews, I remember applying for my dream company. It's Twitch TV, because I'm a live streamer on Twitch, and it was simple React questions. There was a harder challenge that I struggled to even get to, setting up a React component, and I couldn't even do it. I blanked. The simplest thing too. That anxiety really can get you.
Yeah, man.
But that's pretty cool. Okay, so they at least do have some bar, and that's a really, really good sign. Did you ever have? Do you feel like everyone was kind of on the same playing field when you went into the curriculum?
No. There were people who were several people who were starting from zero, and they were they are the poster child people going to boot camps in which they learn so much in so much time, and I admire them for that, because I came in with background, not professional, but background in coding, so I was comfortable more or less all the way through. Me and I'd say 2 or 3 other people had done Udemy courses, were decently quick at learning these things. It was just that the pace of the bootcamp is still fast. So everyone struggled to some extent, but there was definitely different levels. And they did say, in this context, me and others, it was some of the most advanced cohort, I think, in Lisbon, for example. So they're saying that each year people are getting better, which, it's, yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, go ahead, Henry.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, in my case, I definitely felt like it was a little all over the place too. There were plenty of people that had done no coding, and there were also people that had released an app professionally, had done some professional development work, but really they were looking to kind of round out their portfolio and gain access to the post-grad help of being able to make connections and the networking.
Okay. We're definitely going to dive into that. Go ahead, Adrian.
Mm-hmm. Same thing for me. People of all different playing fields. There was people in the cohort, just one that was really above everybody else. But in general, I still think there was people from all levels.
Okay.
And one thing I can attest is at the end, not everybody, but the people you could see putting in the work was really, really getting there, at a place where it's good enough, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Let's dive into the meat of it. What do you think of the curriculum?
I thought it was really helpful. Personally, coming with like very little coding background, my biggest thing is like I had tried to teach myself a couple of times, but not having that structure of like having the foresight to be able to know what's the most popular thing right now, and constantly changing my mind if I'm constantly doing research and not really committing to something. Having something set in stone that they know works and that are employable skills was super helpful for me to be able to just put my head down and like Adrian was saying, you just put in the work and you're going to get the results. Because I know that I kept trying to teach myself and I would go all over the place of like, maybe I should learn JavaScript, maybe I should learn Python, maybe I should learn Angular, maybe I should learn this. And it was just overwhelming. I needed to just commit to something.
What did you actually learn in the coding bootcamp?
Oh, man. I mean, we start off with basics like HTML, CSS. I think that was like the first week. Second week, I think we started diving into JavaScript and coding logic into like games. And then my memory is going to be a little fuzzy on it, but I remember doing things like handlebars. Not a fan of that.
Yeah.
Never really used that much. And then, React,
I was about to comment on it.
What was that?
I was about to comment on the use of handlebars.
Oh, man. I hope I never have to use that again.
Why'd you hate it so much?
Just we went over it so briefly, and then we immediately dove into React. It's like, this makes so much more logical sense that like, I don't know why you would go back to handlebars now. It's like using jQuery and then using anything else. It's like, oh my God. It's like it worked for the time, but.
Yeah, I would say that it's just because React makes all the front end part and make all those dynamic components and interaction without refreshing the page and everything so much easier. While handlebars, you're thinking about the server part and you're outputting a certain template, and it got confusing for some people. I didn't enjoy it as well. So in 2020, so it's like 3 days of HTML and CSS, and then we go deep dive into JavaScript, in pretty good speed, I would say. So I did a front-end course before, which was like part-time at night for people who are working. And you learn more about JavaScript in 2 or 3 days that I learned in 1 or 2 months. So very fast. I would say I'm pretty happy with the JavaScript part because that's the second half of the first week, and then the second week, and then you do a game. It's pretty good. So I would say that what might cause issues in the future is people not having practiced enough with HTML, CSS. CSS is like a beast of its own. In HTML, ideally, you'll learn semantic HTML, that stuff. We learned that went by really quickly, HTML, CSS specifically. But JavaScript, which is very important for more complicated development, it was pretty good in a week and a half. And we program a game in Canvas. Then we have 1 week of the first project, which was again in Canvas. Generally, for me, was alone. And then the second module is Node, Express, MongoDB, handlebars. And so we jump into that. So making a full stack application, meaning Node, Express, MongoDB on the backend, and serving HTML pages with Express. That's 2 weeks of that. Then we do a project week again in pairs, or at most 3 people. And then we jump into React in the 7th and 8th week. And then we do another week of project in the 9th week. Okay. So, yeah. So 9-week bootcamp. I don't know how many bootcamps are 9 weeks, but for a 9-week bootcamp, it's pretty intense. So for people coming in with 0 experience, I think it's challenging. And I think it's a quite good path of being like, you're going to focus on this path, the mind stack, instead of being lost like Henry was.
What was the cost of the bootcamp for 9 weeks?
Generally, I think in Lisbon, it's like 6,500.
Okay.
And in what I say, slightly higher just because of interest, all that stuff. But Lisbon, that's it. I think it changes by country. Berlin will be higher and so on.
Okay.
Yeah. Over here it was I think it was like 11,000.
Oh,
Yeah, Portugal is way cheaper, way cheaper than USA in general and everything. So
interesting. Okay, a couple questions
For
about
me, it
that.
was the same thing as Henry. It was 11,500, and there's always going on. They always have a few promotions and boot camps that goes down to like 9,000, which is what I paid at the time. So that's the price I paid in Miami. I know in São Paulo here in Brazil, they also have one, and what they charge is 17.5 thousand at the time, Brazilian real, which that amounts to around $4,000 at the time. So it's really cheap in Brazil. And I just want to go back and elaborate a little bit on the curriculum. As Rodrigo said, we studied the MERN stack, and I thought at the time that was great. MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, especially the backend part, I thought gave me a really good idea of what I was getting into and how to interact with REST APIs, et cetera, et cetera. The two biggest criticisms I would have is, as Henry said, handlebars, which already at the time it wasn't the most updated thing. We had React, and it was this brand new thing, and it was in the curriculum later. But I personally didn't think it would have been that bad because it introduces concepts like components and everything like that. But we took way too long going over handlebars, at least in my cohort. We spent way too long on it. It was like 3 or 4 days, which for a 9-week bootcamp, that's eternity. And it wasn't really good. And when it came to React was obviously great in general, but they didn't touch on new concepts like React hooks and prop types. And that at the time was already like a big thing, and it could have been in the curriculum, in my opinion. I didn't know that at the time, but as soon as I finished, I was like, dude, I kind of should have learned that.
Okay.
Don, do you want to go talk about like this criticism at the end? But if we're talking about the curriculum now, I mean, I can also continue because I also have opinions about that. But what do you think?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We can dive into, if it's relevant now, mention it now. But I have a couple questions before we dive into that.
Yeah.
So handlebars, it's really interesting. I completely understand not caring about it whatsoever, but having templating language, like my first position, we did use React. We had a big React component for our checkout, but that was a small component with the entire app. And I spent majority of my time in a template. I was working with Django, and even just spending a few days at Full Stack Academy, I think it was a few days working with templates. Hold on. It was really helpful. It helped me get me through my first position. It helped get me hired. So don't underestimate that knowledge, because I had this concept in my mind where if you learn React, why not just do the entire app in React? And my first company taught me why that was a mistake in a lot of situations. So don't underestimate a templating language. That's kind of my just advice for viewers in general. I guess my main question revolved around CSS. A lot of coding boot camps brush over it very quickly. Do you feel like you're pretty comfortable with CSS after that coding boot camp?
I have a different context, but I'll actually let Adrian and Henry say it first.
Adrian, any opinion?
Well, as I said, I had a little bit of experience with CSS. So the things that we went through the cohort, including like Bootstrap, which was a big thing. They teach Flexbox and et cetera through Bootstrap, which in my opinion was a good thing. I use it very much till this day. Some people don't like it, and I can understand that for sure. But I am not the right person to answer. I think it was really good. I think everything that I learned by myself before going into Ironhack was taught there, and it was everything that I needed really to know at that point.
Yeah, personally, I spent the month or two before starting at Ironhack going through Treehouse, the website that kind of helps you with coding tutorials. So I had a basic rundown of HTML and CSS and JavaScript through there. But it's like Rodrigo mentioned earlier, it's like what I taught myself in like that month or two, or it might have been 3, I don't remember. We basically covered all of that in the first week at Ironhack. So the pace was intense. And I felt that at first it was a little overwhelming because I was just kind of getting my bearings with HTML and CSS. But, you know, you keep using it throughout the entire bootcamp. Like, yeah, we did have Bootstrap, but I still wrote plenty of custom CSS for my project. So by the end of it, I definitely felt pretty comfortable.
Here's what I'd say. Ironhack prioritizes JavaScript. And I think that's a good decision. It's because you're going to have trade-offs if you spend more time in HTML, CSS. And I think JavaScript is a really good thing to prioritize because it's more logically complex. And they do teach. What I mean specifically is that in terms of JavaScript, the front-end course that I did before was super disappointing because still working with jQuery, which I kind of just dislike. But because we were in 2019, 2020, and they didn't do so much there. JavaScript, you learn much more intensely in Ironhack. HTML, CSS, in my opinion, is of course the trade-off. You're brushed over that very much. I spent weeks and months learning like responsive web design and media queries and transitions, animation, all that stuff. You're basically going to learn the very basics of CSS, selectors, properties. In some labs, you're going to use Bootstrap, but they talk about, you kind of have like a few hours talking about Bootstrap, and then it's your choice if you want to get into it more and use for your projects. I dislike it just because it limits me and I want to continue practicing HTML, CSS. But that will be difficult to do if you come in with zero experience and you try to learn CSS from there. You're going to have to dedicate more time because CSS it's kind of brushed over sometimes, not just in bootcamps, but the idea people don't like CSS. But if you're going to be in front end as like a UI designer, for example, or developer, not working part of the JavaScript in React and logical, if you're gonna work a lot in front end development and design, that's something you're gonna have to practice yourself a lot. That's all. The trade-off is you learn a lot of JavaScript really quickly and quite well.
Okay.
One thing that I would like to mention is, since it was a full stack bootcamp and not a front end bootcamp, I thought brushing over CSS and HTML is very understandable.
Yeah.
And the logical side of JavaScript really helped with learning backend for everybody. Just understanding and getting practice with JavaScript and just logic itself was really helpful, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I've only reviewed one bootcamp that focused specifically on front end and focused more on CSS than it did on JavaScript. And that was an interesting review. Now, that's interesting that it sounds like the consensus is if you didn't supplement it, your CSS is going to be pretty weak. You're going to have to supplement it. The only thing I want to know, did the bootcamp mention that? Did they deliver the CSS portion as we're going to teach you everything you need to know? Or did they deliver it, we're brushing over it, you're going to have to supplement?
Yeah, they made no promises about it. They're very honest, not a negative way at all, of being like this, you're learning the basics and just do what's enough to make this application not look like bare HTML. They didn't say that, but it's kind of the intent. They're pretty honest. And I mean, considering I had like basically 1 day or 2 days of CSS, supplemented with everything else, the other labs. No, they wouldn't say it is everything. It's its own monster. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they made nothing about being complete as a CSS.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I know that I went in with a perspective of thinking, I'm going to go into this 9-week bootcamp. I'm going to go out of it knowing everything really well. And my perspective changed very quickly, as I started. And I started to see the amount of material you're trying to cover. You're not going to be able to master everything, and you're not going to be able to cover everything in class. So it becomes super important for you to go over the modules on your own, like the day before you come into class that day. Yeah, but no one's going to come in and force you to do it or tell you hey, really go over the recommended reading or, Sometimes I think at the end of the module, like they'll have like recommended reading if you want to do a deeper dive, or if you talk to a teacher or the TA, they'll recommend something you can check out to kind of fill in those gaps. But it's just unrealistic. And I remember in my cohort specifically, there were a couple people that were frustrated with, one, the speed of the course, and two, it's like you're not really giving everyone a chance sometimes to feel super comfortable before you're moving on to the next thing. But in 9 weeks, that's just impossible. It's like you have to realize that you have to change that perspective sometimes and be realistic about it.
Should it be more than 9 weeks?
It depends.
Depends on the goals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was happy that it was 9 weeks because I felt like, I was employed almost immediately after out of the what's that called, the week before the last hiring fair, right? Yeah, there we go. So I got hired out of that. So I was super happy, and like I knew I wasn't like at that point I had a lot more to learn, and it was going to be a lifelong learning journey. But so I was happy, but there was a portion of time in the beginning where I was like, did I screw up not going part-time and doing like the 6-month version where I would have more time to digest all this information? But I'm glad it worked out the way it did.
I would say it's a pretty decent bootcamp, like pretty good bootcamp for people starting from zero. And even for me, who just did the static front end side, it just gave me like the speed to go ahead and learn a lot more stuff. I was insecure about jumping into getting lost. It was a very good, okay, here's a path, you're going to do it. And I did well there. But the point, I guess, of being 9 weeks is that what are the lengths of bootcamp are there? Like 12 months, 16 months, 20, weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks, and so on. This is just a really quick and pretty decent start to web development. That's the goal of if it depends on your goals. And I think for that, it does a pretty good job in 9 weeks. And you to do a better job, of course, we'll get into the actual criticisms about like maybe curriculum or teaching. But the length is pretty good. In terms of length, you learn a lot. You learn so much in 9 weeks, really.
Yeah, well, you save a lot of money, that's for sure. And I think people in general, so there are 100% coding boot camps that will teach you everything you need to know to get a job. Usually they're lengthier than Ironhack.
Of course.
And so you do have to make trade-offs with only it being 9 weeks. I think it's important for a coding boot camp like that. I wish I would have heard you guys say Ironhack did emphasize that you're going to need to supplement CSS, because there's a big difference between not like saying that you're going to learn everything you need to know and actually telling people it's a good idea to supplement to become more marketable. I think that's a huge difference, and I wish Ironhack would emphasize that more. I wish my own coding bootcamp, Full Stack Academy, would emphasize that more. They're very weak in CSS. It's just a gripe I have with coding bootcamps in general, because I mentor a lot of developers, and a lot of them get rejected because they don't know enough CSS. They leaned on Bootstrap too much, or they really only know the fundamentals, or they don't know the fundamentals very well. So I wish coding bootcamps would prioritize that just a little bit more. But as you said, JavaScript needs to be the priority. I think that always should be the case in the coding bootcamp. But so it's a hard balance, and especially 9 weeks, it's very hard to balance all that out.
For sure.
And there's one thing I like to mention. There's one guy that at Ironhack, which his job is basically getting you a job, and they call him outcomes manager. His name is Daniel Brito. Everybody knows him from Miami, at least, and possibly from other cohorts too. And if it wasn't mentioned in class, I think Daniel Brito mentioned to me like 100 times that you got to go out and get it. You got to go out and study. That Ironhack's not enough. And even if he didn't talk about it in a development way, he completely emphasized on like LinkedIn and all these different platforms, which is what he's made to do. And that's his job there. So in my opinion, that's how I felt during the whole thing. I felt like, hey, this isn't going to be enough. Or even if I don't have to grind in the development end, I'll have to grind on LinkedIn and networking and going to events and going to, I forgot the name, I apologize. It's these events for coding.
Meetups?
What?
Meetups?
Oh yeah, meetups, but I meant the events for coding, like Shell Hacks is a hackathon.
Hackathons, there we go.
I apologize.
You're
So that's it.
I agree 100%. It was definitely emphasized, at least to me, as well, that showing up to class and doing the work at the actual campus was the bare minimum. If you're only doing that, I saw several people that just did that, showed up to class right when it started and left as soon as it ended. And those were the people that either struggled throughout the entire thing, dropped out, or struggled to find work after. It was a very common thing in my cohort, at least, that we would get there a couple hours early, most of us at least. We'd go over concepts together. We would go over stuff at lunch. We would stay late. Sometimes, they'd open that beer tap and we'd empty that out. But at the same time, we were bomber peaking and we were studying, we were getting our stuff done. So it was very common for us to be putting in 12 to 14-hour days, and that was definitely encouraged.
Mm-hmm. In my case, it's in Portugal and I did remote because COVID situations here were getting worse. So they changed to remote with some students being able to go into class, but they were still in Zoom there. They prefer not work at home. They did emphasize that for the length of the curriculum, as well as but especially job hunting, you only get out as much as you put in. They weren't as upfront as Adrian said, like, this is not enough. I got that message that, like, so in terms of technical knowledge, they weren't saying it's hard because it depends on the person I'm talking to. If I'm talking with a teacher, if I'm talking with kind of outcomes manager or recruit, kind of the person that gives a career week, the message is different. So the professor is very raw and honest that he does say you need to learn more and more and more about all this stuff. But generally I kind of got the impression that they want to communicate to us that up until the career week and so on, that, yeah, this is enough. You're going to get a job, or you're going to work hard, but you're going to get a job. And so the context of this year is different, of course. Not only in my country, but COVID, and now it's November, December. But I still don't have a job, for example. But I have my own process in regards to that. But up until more or less the career week and 1 or 2 weeks after that, they were like, yeah, just go hard. And of course, grind your LinkedIn, grind your networking, learn new things. Looking for a job is a full-time job. You only get as much as you put in. But they weren't like brutally honest with like, oh, this is not enough. No, they did have that idea of they want to communicate that it's enough. You can get a job, because then they were saying prioritize job hunting more or less. It will depend on the place. It will depend at the time of the year you get out of the bootcamp, because we finished in September. In September, here's a rush of new junior positions, not only but mostly because of college graduates, for example. And so there are a bunch of new jobs and programs. So we try and make use of that. But that's kind of, I could say, if it's like September, October specifically. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious, how many people did each of you have in your cohort?
17.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I had about, I want to say it was like maybe 17 or 18, probably less than 20. And I think out of all of those, I think only one person dropped out. Everyone else made it to the end.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So,
I had like 25 people, and same thing, one dropout. He did it at the very first week. But I'm not 100% sure. I can check to see how many people were exactly in my cohort.
Okay. How many people that you know of got jobs out of your cohort?
2 now.
Okay.
Out of mine, basically, I think only like 1 or 2 people struggled to find a job after 3 months, 1 or 2 weren't employed. and I haven't spoken to them in a while, so I'm not sure if they, stayed applying to different places and did their part, or I'm not sure what exactly happened there.
In my cohort, I had the chance to meet like 5 awesome people, 5 or 6, and we're still in touch too. We were talking just today. All of these people got jobs. Some of them took around 2 to 3 months. Some of them were employed after the career week. Myself, as I said, like before the course was even over, I was already employed. I know people. There's one guy specifically that I know to this day hasn't found a job. To be honest, he is not the most hardworking person, and that was always clear from the very beginning, making up like a lot of excuses and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But out of the 25 people, within like, I would say a month or 2, I would say that 60 or 70% of people were employed in this period. And after that, there were like 1 or 2 people that were really good. One of the persons who won the award for the last project, the final project of the cohort, she wasn't employed until like 6 months later. That was the only real case where I found a person who was hardworking and really intelligent too, and really suited for development in general, couldn't find a job in a long period of time, and I was actively looking for it and etc.
Yeah, okay. I think I empathize with that person, but I think in my case it's like that I know of for sure 2 people got jobs. I don't have contact with. I keep in contact in the WhatsApp group with like at least half of the cohort, but at least 2 people got jobs now. It's a tough time, honestly. Like this time, it's compared to those like 2019 or 2018, it's difficult. It's a bunch of different contexts, not only globally, but in this country, maybe.
Yeah. And in a second, we're actually going to dive into like how they helped you with the career transition. That's going to be our final part. But before I forget, what do you think of the instructors?
I was a huge fan. Shout out to Nico. I know that when I got my first job, like it was a couple weeks in, there was a moment where there were several moments where I felt like a fish out of water and just kind of a little overwhelmed. Like I would walk across, because I was working at Brickell City Center out of WeWork there. So I would cross the street and go talk to Nico and be like, hey, I'm dealing with this. I'm a little bit lost. And he still helped me, and we still keep in touch. And man, I have nothing but great things to say about the instructors there. They really do care, and they want to see you succeed. And yeah, like I said, I'm still in touch with everyone. So they're awesome, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good for you for staying in touch too. Everyone kind of parts away, and kudos to Nico.
Yeah, it's tough, but yeah, they're really great about it.
Okay.
My teacher was quite good, so I'm not sure if we have time to get into, for example, of course we're talking about how the instructors are. Do you mean like how the teaching method is? How thorough are they? How is the day-to-day? In my case, my teacher was quite good. So mine was remote. And he explains things thoroughly, patiently. And of course, it's a new challenge because they changed to remote in they had to make that decision in 2 weeks, more or less. So they changed very quickly. So compared to that in the different context, the professor was quite good, quite thorough. To any questions, sometimes there was the issue with the pacing because someone interrupts with a question and everyone's on Zoom. You can't ask a TA that's beside you. You have kind of interrupt sometimes. He very patiently provided answers for most of the things that is relevant to what was going on. Very thorough, very good teacher. The TAs were also pretty, they were good. They didn't hand feed you the solutions. They said, okay, maybe look into this, or maybe do that thing. If you get stuck, if there's a big error, then you'll debug it and you'll change the code together, all that stuff. But pretty good.
Okay.
I've had the same structure as Henry did, Nico. And in my opinion, Nico is an amazing dude, if nothing else. His teaching sense, like actual teaching sense, it's not the greatest in the world, in my opinion. There were times in class where people would get very confused. At general class where he was live coding, which can be really hard, there were times that nobody was understanding what was going on. And his teaching wasn't fast. But every single time after class, which is very fast, by the way, compared to the rest of the day, you have sometimes an hour and a half of class, actual looking at live coding and new content, and the rest of the day working on katas yourself. What they call is like little challenges for that specific part of the curriculum. Nico was an amazing developer, and every single one-on-one that I had with him, which were many, and it was available for basically everybody because it's the whole day, so he kind of has time for everybody. Every single one-on-one, he was able to solve every problem that I had, every single question. He is an amazing developer. But his teaching sense in classes itself could struggle a little bit. But any questions that I had after that, he would answer it. If not him, during class, the TAs were also really good, which is common with boot camps that recent grads become TAs after it. There's only like 3 in Ironhack, which isn't a problem or anything. It's not that they're doing to rise the numbers of employed people after the cohort. They stay there for a long time. And he really liked it. I think I got the chance to talk with Nick, which is a TA at the time, and he loved the job at the time.
I'd like to get a clarification on how was your structure on day-to-day when learning the curriculum?
As I said, it was like new content. Like this today, we're gonna look at handlebars or bootstrap, whatever, and then it's presented. There's like live coding above it, while Nico, the teacher, is presenting it and explaining concepts and new concepts. And after we're done, we get a challenge, and we basically work on this challenge for most of the day, depending on the size of it. Sometimes it's just the morning and then new content, so a little bit more classes. And at the end of each 3 weeks, I believe, there is a bigger challenge that is supposed to be done like over the weekend on specific subjects. In my specific cohort, the first one was a JavaScript game. It was a game that was supposed to be made with Canva. Myself and some other people used Phaser 3, which is a game engine with JavaScript that was allowed to. For the second week, I believe it was backend. And we went into that, then we learned React, and we put it both together.
Okay, that's really interesting because it's I think it sounds quite different to mine. So I think in day-to-day, and I think, of course, maybe they've changed the. It sounds like their curriculum, from what I can tell, is I guess unionized, the same all over the globe, and so they have their own structure how they're gonna the curriculum is the same, and of course the way the teacher will teach it is slightly different. But I found that what is happening right now in Portugal in the remote, I think they have 2 remote classes now. One of my colleagues is working as a TA there. It's like, I think, let's say most of the morning or all the morning is like lecture, explaining stuff, doing code alongs, showing the video, explaining the stuff, and then maybe that extends a bit after lunch, and then you have a longer lab for like 2 or 3 hours on that topic with several iterations. That changes. Sometimes you do the continuation of the lab in the morning, lecture in the afternoon, but there is a criticism that it seems that both in remote and my cohort, there's a lot of lecture, a lot of explaining, some code alongs, but it's like a lot of listening. And so what I've seen from what I've noticed, when looking up other boot camps, if I want to like Lowagan, it seems their structure is completely different. You have like maybe 2 hours of lectures in the morning, and the rest of the day is coding. Katas, challenges, labs, and you have different TAs going around helping you. Super different here. We had like 2 TAs, and since it was remote, it was very difficult for them to help them while the lecture was going on, because you have to split off from the main call and so on. So this might apply more for remote things, but it seemed to also happen. I assisted as a TA a couple of weeks ago for a week, and the structure was very similar in person in Lisbon. So my feedback would be there, like I know there's a lot of material to teach, but they try to really fit it all between 9 and 6 p.m. They don't super try to encourage going overtime, and they really do encourage breaks. That's something that I did like to see. But we have a 9-week bootcamp that is super intense, and the best way to learn is practicing coding and getting stuck yourself instead of listening for most of the time. It wasn't 70% of the time, but there were days which was just lectures. That was a bit tough. Wow. So I would say, I know there's a lot to teach in 9 weeks, but as if you might have to do a certain lecture really quickly and then drop them into an exercise or lab, or with the 2 TAs circling around properly, or maybe one more TA, so you really learn in practice. That's what I would encourage.
Man, I feel like I had a kind of a mixture of both your experiences where, like, Adrian, I think you have a very fair criticism of Nico. I think there were times where he definitely struggled, and yeah, I can definitely see where, having to live code something and having everyone watch you and trying to solve the problem in the moment, like sometimes that is hard to make work effectively, and sometimes people did get lost. But I was appreciative of the fact that, like, in my experience, we'd start off the day with maybe an hour of lecture. We'd have a couple of hours of working things on our own in the lab. So he might go over something that I didn't totally understand, but that's why I would go over the module before I came into class that day. Cause I know he's going to have to go through it quickly. It's a lot of information. Sometimes he might struggle with certain things. So I kind of said, well, I got to do my part and kind of figure this out now. So if I get lost, that's kind of, on me. So that way I kind of like that we spent more time, like you were saying, Rodrigo, kind of coding and failing on our own. And when we needed them, the TAs were there, or Nico was there. So I feel like I got a good mixture. And at first, when I signed up for the bootcamp, I thought it was going to be more lecture. And I think a lot of people did. And they were kind of frustrated when the lectures could sometimes be a little hard to follow, or that there wasn't a lot of it. But as you start learning more and you start figuring out that it has to be this quick and you have to learn this on your own, because knowing theory will only take you so far. You have to kind of put it into practice. I think I kind of really appreciated that. And I felt like for me and my cohort, it felt like a good balance there. Because in the afternoon, then you'd have another hour of lecture, and then the rest of the day it was just labs. It was great.
I think the most likely thing to happen for people going to in-person is the mixture, because mine was in remote, and I've also heard of other people in remote, which is lectures until but not always lectures until 3 p.m. But then you have a longer lab. But really, we did have. So granted, the teacher was really good at explaining things, and were thorough, and that's every question. But then we had pacing issues, and so we're listening. That's for rough. Most of the morning, and then still a bit of the afternoon, and then we did one long lab in which what happens. So you start to forget things that happen early in the day.
It's
you get
too much.
stuck in the lab. You get stuck in the lab instead of being 30-minute, 1 hour lesson. Do the bite size, the whatever issue, and then jumping between that. I think this will vary a bit between remote and in person and the teacher. Just that they have what I heard from one last other podcast episode is that the curriculum is universal and consistent. The method of teaching, there is a suggested standard, which might be the mix, but sometimes we'll have cases in which you're going to have long lectures because it was remote, because it was new, because the teacher is answering a lot of questions, which is good, but it was tiring. And it was tiring for me because I caught onto things really quickly, but others were lost and couldn't hold on to things for all that time. So it's tricky balance.
So we're gonna pause the post-grad assistance for the job search, and we're gonna continue with the feedback. This is really, really good feedback, and I like how just self-aware you are at your own pace, but I like how you analyze things. I'm actually curious. did they have a way for you to give feedback at least like once a week?
Okay, yeah. So, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, I think it was once a week. What happens is that the teacher drops off, like, I can't remember the type of application, but it's like a stick it application, which means, like, in our case, this will vary by teacher. Yours like keep, stop doing, and introduce or start doing. And anonymously, students will put things there. They didn't like the long lectures, or maybe what happened with us is that we have 1 hour of code katas every morning to wake up, and that's super difficult for most people. There are other, like, valid criticism, which is like maybe have 1 hour, that hour lecture, and then jump into the lab of an relevant challenge related to the curriculum. Maybe not a code kata, which is certainly doing a challenge in JavaScript. But you can also argue that a lot of recruitment processes, I think here in Lisbon, they use more or less code katas or those types of challenges. So that's useful. But in terms of the feedback, weekly you give feedback on stick-it notes. Monday morning, the first thing the teacher does is review those things, put things together that are similar, and respond to the feedback. Reality is, it's hard to change how a curriculum is taught in one cohort. So the changes that Ironhack will make will most likely be very gradually, each two cohorts, because the teacher can't magically change how it's doing things, but they are receiving feedback every week, and probably every cohort, which is good. So some of the experience sounds different compared to what you guys had in Miami, and of course everything is different, the context, but they are open to feedback. How likely they are to change is another thing, of course.
And I've gotten feedback from different reviews with the different bootcamp. They changed things too frequently, or they didn't vet a lot of the feedback coming in. They didn't talk about it. So I like that they bring it on gradually. I think that's a really good strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I think every week they send out a survey, and you can fill that out on your own time.
Yeah.
And then once a module, I think, like when you finish a module, which is like a couple weeks, I think, I don't remember. Every time you finish a module, you'll like sit down with someone in person. At Miami, it was Jessica, at least during my time. And she'd ask you like a few questions about how you felt. How do you feel about the pacing? Is there anything that you would, want to see changed or improved? Something as simple as, like, I think someone mentioned, like, oh yeah, the snacks are running out too quickly because everyone's eating them. So like, she asked everyone what their favorite cereal was. And like that week we had like a bunch of cereal for breakfast, and it was awesome. Like, they definitely go out of their way to try to make you feel comfortable and that you're getting what you need, and whatever you need to succeed, like, they're there for you. So that's pretty cool.
And
I felt the same way. I'm not sure if you're interested in about the feedback we got from doing the coding challenges and etc.
Yeah.
But if you want, I can talk a little bit about that too.
I'm not interested about the coding challenges. So
I mean, the feedback, like, throughout the course, like what they think about our coding challenges, about our level, about our skill.
When you say are you talking about feedback from the instructors? I think that's what's confusing.
From the instructors to the students, in this case.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead and share.
Okay, yeah. My experience for giving feedback back to the school, it was much like the same for Henry. The form for weekly or every module, whatever is the case. Questions like, how's the teacher? What do you think about his teaching style, etc. But when it's backwards, the teachers giving feedback to students, it was honestly great, in my opinion. Every week there's coding katas, as they say, and you bring in and you do it with a TA, and they give you feedback on every single coding challenge you do. Like, hey, you didn't do too well at this part. It would be cooler if you studied this part, or if it's Bootstrap, go learn some Flex properties. And that was really good. I felt like I could manage myself better when they gave me feedback on the things I was lacking.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. I think that's really important. And to fit that feedback constructively in like a 9-week course when you have up to 20 students, that can be a very hard thing. And one thing I wanted to mention, I love that they have the instructor all the way through, because I do think you build up a connection with your instructor. And I've definitely reviewed coding boot camps where they cycle in instructors. And the advantage of that is each instructor kind of specializes. They know their stuff really well. And you don't have situations where, someone like Nico might struggle with the section because they practiced their section over and over and over, and they've gotten good feedback about how they teach, their pace and everything else with that specific material. But I find that coding boot camps that do have instructors that pretty much learn everything they need to for the entire course, they're going to be weaker in some areas, but there's just a sense of camaraderie, of just like building up a connection with your instructor, trusting that they really care about your growth and care about you. And it sounds like all of you kind of really built that up with your instructor. And we've obviously mentioned Nico several times. It sounds like he's loved by a lot of students. So I'm really, really glad to hear that. And Adrian, kind of what you mentioned with the feedback, I think feedback is taken much better from someone you do trust. And when you do have instructors cycling in, you trust that they're knowledgeable in their industry, but you still, like, feedback is taken better when you trust a person, when you built that relationship and you could trust that they care about your growth. They're not just kind of telling you you're wrong or trying to like hit the minimum checklist of doing their job. They actually want to get to know you, see why you struggled in this area. And it sounds like Ironhack kind of has that sensibility to it. Would I be correct in saying that?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
That's really interesting to hear. Because I think my experience is it's a super different context. And they did what they could. It ends up being naturally worse because they were changing remote all of a sudden. And so you're not in person. So granted, you can't do as good of a job in person. I would like to believe and hope that most of the Ironhack campuses do that type of feedback teaching. I think that in my case, the TAs give feedback on your labs when you have something like wrong, obviously wrong. It's slightly difficult to get feedback on optimizations, on cleaner code, or stuff like that. It's like when it's wrong. It's what they had time for, I guess. In my cohort, they were respectful. I don't think we have the culture of grind and almost workaholic so much. So it's like you work 9 to 6, and if you as a student are gonna work past 6, you do that. Keep working. Don't work the entire night, because you're gonna get worn out the next day. And if you need help, give feedback. Ask feedback to the TAs, and of course, it's post 6 p.m. They'll give feedback when they can. In terms of in class, unfortunately, the nature of remote is that it's harder to have the constant feedback in. But when they did, mostly to other students, they are very I don't know how to say it, amicable, friendly, honest. They don't spoon feed you the results. They guide you on how to learn and how to do a certain thing, which is good.
Okay. So I want to ask this question. We have about 15 minutes left, but this is probably the most important part of it. Before we move on, is there any other constructive feedback you have about the coding bootcamp of what they could do better? Anything major?
They need to go over the curriculum, the modules, the written material.
Okay.
Because there's typos, there's old information on how to set up Ubuntu, there's stuff like that which they need to review. It's very basic and it should be reviewed every cohort. And this is used globally. So a lot of the issues I see on Slack of they don't happen for every module and every week, but you start out the cohort generally with some technical issues. And so they should review that. I think it's relatively simple. I would say that they've also been working on overhauling the learning platform, from what I heard. Yeah, because, okay, so we're all in Ironhack, and we haven't heard so much about other bootcamps. I think, do other bootcamps have stuff like extra exercises, like those flashcards to memorize certain okay, no, I'm probably getting too much into this. I would say just review the written material, the curriculum written material. That should be reviewed every cohort and maybe tuned up. Besides that, my experience was very different, I think, from a lot of other experiences because, well, super different country. It was remote and so on. So can't speak about Ironhack in general. I think I've heard very good things about Ironhack in general. So, okay.
And well, I think that's important feedback. And I can guarantee you pretty much every bootcamp does see my video. And a lot of staff have reached out to me, and a lot of feedback that is shared, with, your specific country where you had it. I think they're going to make use of it. And so I wouldn't blow it off as my experience is unique. A lot of people do that. A lot of people say, like I've heard really good things, but mine was unique. It probably doesn't matter as much. I'm glad you kind of spoke up about your experience, because if you're experiencing it, like just the data shows other people are experiencing it as well. So this is really important feedback.
Yeah. The curriculum thing will apply to everyone. I think what happened for mine was just the nature of remote and how the day schedule went, how the classes went. I'm sure they're going to change somewhat because they're back to in person. The teacher and the TAs changed. I think they all got jobs and went elsewhere, Germany and so on. So that's why I have a bit of concern about being like this specific cohort had these specific issues. But there's of course a trend. So I would just say to watch out for that in general.
Well,
sorry, go on. I think I'm done. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe that's kind of feedback of just remote sessions in general. And it sounds like that's not really focused 100% on Ironhack. That's also a big portion of just what it's like to do this remote. And there's a big difference between doing a coding bootcamp remote and in person. And generally the feedback is it's not as good. It's not worth the money. It's not like the experience is very different. There are different challenges that come with it. And I have a personal opinion that I really think they should lower the prices on their remote courses. And because I do think it makes a difference. So I think your feedback kind of tied into that a bit. I do want to be careful of our time. Definitely, you guys went into a lot of good details that I think people are going to appreciate. So last thing, we'll spend just a couple minutes on it. What'd they do for the job assistance once you actually graduated?
So I might speak here just because it's the most recent example, I think. So there's a career week, which I think your outcomes manager or someone who has worked in recruitment will help you go over a bunch of strategies for job hunting. Strategies are quite good. And then you can also freely schedule one-on-one sessions every time you want or on a weekly basis. For my case, there wasn't a job hiring fair just because COVID. I think they might bring that back. But what they teach you in a fully dedicated Monday to Friday career week, it was very much pushing a bunch of different strategies for job hunting, and quite good ones. Ones that sometimes I see programmers that graduated from maybe college, they don't have their LinkedIn all set up and they use that much. It's just like a very basic profile. They go into detail how to make a really good LinkedIn profile in CV, networking, hitting people up on LinkedIn, generally good strategies. I think that was the essential of the career week. And the post career week support, in my case, there's a weekly meeting for everyone for free, just to go into a call and say, okay, this is how stuff is going. How's your strategy? Let's review strategy for everyone in group. And then there's also one-on-one sessions. So it's pretty consistent, pretty good in terms of the planning. And your experience will vary with your outcomes manager or your recruit. I think it's outcomes manager. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the benefits of being in person was we were able to have mock soft skill interviews as well as a mock technical interview. That was super helpful because you have someone who's a specialist who's sitting down with you one-on-one, giving you feedback on how you can improve on these things. For us, our outcomes manager in Miami was Brito. He was super helpful with how to set up your LinkedIn, what's the most effective statistically from what he's seen, how to set up your resume, how to word it, make it one page, how to style it, every single thing that you could possibly need, and like really emphasizing, you know, how important it is to continue coding once you graduate. You want to get those green squares on your GitHub to show that you're still working on stuff, as well as, you know, make applying to jobs a full-time job. You can't stop. You can't just apply to one place and then get discouraged if you get a no. You know, you have to keep going and keep moving forward. That's just the nature of the beast.
There's one thing I'd like to touch on that in my experience I couldn't have because I was international and I'm not legally allowed to work in the United States. So I couldn't participate in the last week of the bootcamp because it's actually a 10-week bootcamp, 9 weeks of development. And the last entire week is, they call it career week, which they have the hiring fair, they have these mock interviews. And I thought that was awesome. I didn't. Maybe can elaborate more on it, on how good it was. I know a little bit of outcomes that around like 20% of people got hired out of the hiring fair. And I think that was their number until today. So immediately after the course, after 1 week, which is, in my opinion, great. You have like 20% chance of being hired right after. As I said, I couldn't participate. Maybe Henry can say a few things about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that whole week was spent on getting yourself ready and preparing yourself, your resume, your LinkedIn, your projects, cleaning everything up, learning how to interview, really brushing up on your, you know, any weaknesses that you might have. My biggest anxiety going into the bootcamp was, one, the cost. How am I going to pay for this? And, you know, thankfully they had, you know, financing options available. And then two, like, am I going to get a job? And I was one of the lucky ones that got hired from the hiring fair. I know not everyone was, but I think like within 3 months, like 90% of people had been hired already in the field. So I think that's a testament to the fact that what they're doing does work. But yeah, I'm sure that with everything being remote right now, there's a lot of complications to that. And I'm sure that things are kind of different right now, but they definitely know what they're doing. That was my biggest concern, and they really nailed it with me.
I think that they not only say how to, like, as a bootcamp graduate, if you're not from college or a master's degree or whatever, you're not gonna have all the technical knowledge, right? The technical knowledge you have is from the bootcamp. So what they emphasize is your soft skills and how to sell yourself. So you have some preparation for the career week. Even when the bootcamp starts, you make your own profile with your qualities, your goals, what do you want to focus on, and then you revisit that again in the career week, and you make your own individual profile, how to sell yourself as your soft skills, as your qualities, your story, your pitch, yourself as a person. And so I think that's really special because of what I heard. A lot of resources that are in terms of preparing for interviews, there's very rarely anything like that.
Yeah.
And they add on to the resources that you might find online with their own approach of pitching yourself as a person in your story and everything.
Yep.
Okay. The one concern I've had as I've listened to all of you is it's 9 weeks. It's very rushed. People probably don't have a good, solid understanding of the fundamentals of everything that they're learning, and they're going to need to supplement most likely. And but in 9 weeks, I think it's very telling that they at least did a really good job within those 9 weeks. It's telling because a lot of people did get positions. It sounds like in your cohorts, most people were very successful in them, and that's really what matters. That's why you're going to coding boot camp. And, you know, Henry, like you stated it well, it's a lifelong journey. You're going to be learning for the rest of your career as long as you stay in this career. So I'm really impressed with what they've been able to do in 9 weeks. And I think they have a really good post job assistance or postgraduate job assistance set up. And that's one of the most important pieces, because there are a lot of people applying for entry-level positions, but they don't really know how to be competitive. They don't really work on their soft skills. They don't work on how they interview, and even just some of the strategies that they network and reach out to people. And it sounds like Ironhack is focusing on the right things and encouraging you to put your time and invest it into the right things, which is also very important. So I'm really impressed with that. Okay, so we are pretty much out of time. This was a lot of good information. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and jump into our outros. Again, we'll go left to right. Henry, if people want to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Oh, great question. I'm on LinkedIn, just Henry Doce, DOCE. I have my GitHub on there. I got my resume. I got everything there. I am looking for work now. So if you want to reach me, that's probably the best place to do it.
Perfect. And Henry, you're in Austin now, right?
I am, yeah. Just moved over here 3 weeks ago, I think.
Okay. I've wanted to move to Austin for a while. I was always curious about the market in Austin. So I'm curious how you do.
Absolutely. We can talk about that after if you want.
Sounds good. Rodrigo, how about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So my name is Rodrigo Jorge, so with a J, Moura. Portuguese name, might be hard to find. I'm also on Twitter as Rodrigo JMR _. Twitter Dev is also an amazing resource to find, learn a lot more things. Also overwhelming, so I'm not there too much yet.
Okay, sounds good. How about you, Adrian?
Same thing for me, LinkedIn. My name is, as it is on Zoom, if nobody can see it, is Adrian Wisniewski. I hope that's written somewhere because it's really hard to pronounce. Anyway, there's a few quick things I want to say. If you're an international student and you're curious about Ironhack, please hit me up. Or if you're international Brazilian, please hit me up. I love to talk about the field here or internationally too. Ironhack is in general a really good experience. If you can afford it, you're most likely be doing a great investment. One thing that we didn't touch on that I wanted to mention real quick is Ironhack also has other bootcamps, which is UI UX design and data science. I believe they have something new right now, which I don't even remember. Cybersecurity. Yeah, cybersecurity. And these people are doing, if you're doing physically in the building and not remote, they're walking around there all the time. And that was really valuable experience to me, just being able to talk to UI UXers. They have projects where you can work and they do like their own little hackathon, which involves everybody. So you're working with data scientists and UI UXers, which is something really important for the field to be able to work with prototyping, in my opinion. And that was something that we didn't mention that I found super valuable. And that's it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Adrian. All right. And everyone watching, really appreciate you. Again, I get feedback every single day. Keep giving me that feedback. We're going to do more episodes. Comment in the YouTube video especially. And let me know what you think. Let me know your opinions, especially if you've been considering going to Ironhack. I want to hear what you think about their perspectives. But thanks again for watching. Really appreciate all of you. Henry, Rodrigo, Adrian, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for the invite, man. It was really fun.
For sure.